Nobody can keep the truth at bay forever. Those were the words that had haunted Meri Brown hour after day, drumming their way into her heart like a heartbeat in her very bones as she approached the courthouse. The morning air was bracing, almost sharp, and yet charged with electricity, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Each step she made on the cold marble floors was leaden, not in bodily weight, but in the intangible weight of years of heartache, quiet, and neglect she had borne in the shadows of her marriage. Meri hesitated for a moment before the huge glass doors of the courthouse. Lights from reporters, cameras, and onlookers danced across the glass, reflecting the years she had spent feeling invisible, unheard, and unseen. She squared her shoulders, inhaling deeply and slowly. This was not just about documents in a courthouse or a judge's ruling, it was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, and her life. Today she would no longer be the quiet, forgotten wife. Today she would face Kody Brown, the man to whom she had once given her heart, in a courthouse fight that would be seen by the whole world. Within the courthouse the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, thick with tension. The buzz of hushed tones, snapping cameras, and rustling papers made up an almost dramatic backdrop. The walls, dressed in dark paneling and high ceilings, seemed both imposing and claustrophobic. Each corner seemed to bear the burden of judgment, each shadow a silent observer to the drama soon to be played out. Meri could hear the soft hum of reporters just beyond the courtroom doors, all of them waiting for a moment, a quote that would make this private struggle a spectacle. Her heels clipped sharply against the floor as she went down the hallway, each step echoing like a countdown. She recalled the late nights spent looking within herself, agonizing over whether or not she had failed, whether she had been too demanding, too sensitive, too willing to forgive. She thought of the broken promises, the lonely dinners, the cold nights, the quiet ache of neglect. Each memory was a spark, igniting a fire of determination within her. While Kody Brown was entering from the other side of the courthouse, calm, composed, and impeccably dressed, he strode with the air of command that had always been his trademark. His attorneys stood beside him as a bodyguard, their faces serious, professional, but beneath the composed face there was a flash, a crack in the veneer he hardly ever showed the world. He knew what to expect. He knew the weight of Meri's accusations, the mountain of evidence she had been gathering. And for the first time in years, the man who prided himself on control felt a twinge of uncertainty. The courtroom doors swung open with a resonant thud, and cameras snapped instantly. The flashbulbs lit up the room like brief lightning strikes, capturing the tension etched across every face. Audience members, strangers, friends, family leaned forward in their chairs, feeling something was going to be more than an ordinary court hearing. This was a reckoning, a crash of years of silence and stored-up agony, a collision that would not be soon forgotten. Meri and Kody's eyes locked across the room. The world for an instant vanished. The onlookers, the cameras, the murmurs of reporters, all vanished. There he was, the man she loved, the man who had vowed to share with her a life of dreams, the man who had not been able to appreciate her worth. At that moment, every heartache, every lost moment, every tear she had ever cried in solitude, appeared to merge into one burning point of insight. Today she would no longer be a ghost. Today she would be heard. The judge walked in, robes rustling with a presence of authority that demanded quiet at once. The gavel banged, ringing out in the courtroom, like a trumpet sounding for war. "This court is now in session," the judge declared, voice firm, deep, bearing the gravitas of neutrality. The room was still, the air charged, as Meri and Kody were about to enter the emotional battlefield that had been years in creation. As the proceedings began, Meri's mind wandered back to the years leading up to this day. She remembered the early days of their relationship, moments filled with hope, laughter, and shared dreams. She remembered the excitement of marriage, the thrill of partnership, the warmth of being chosen. But slowly, subtly, the warmth had cooled. Conversations had dwindled. Affection had faded, and the emotional distance had widened. Kody had grown up surrounded by family, numerous wives, and duties that always seemed to overshadow the most basic vow of marriage: attention, care, and respect for one's spouse. The memories of loneliness were etched vividly in her mind. Birthdays spent alone, anniversaries gone without a word, nights spent yearning for recognition that never arrived. Friends had attempted to soothe her, providing counsel and reassurance, but nothing could bridge the widening void between her and Kody. Every thoughtless action, every instance of dismissal, had been a quiet knife, gradually corroding her faith, her optimism, her self-esteem. Now, years later, those silent daggers were about to be confronted head-on. Meri's attorney rose, laying out the foundation of the case. Every document, every message, every piece of testimony meticulously gathered was a testament to her endurance, her courage, and her resolve. "Your Honor," the attorney began, voice firm and unwavering, "we are not here merely to dissolve a marriage. We are here to expose years of emotional abuse, abandonment, and denial of simple respect and attention due to a spouse. The facts will demonstrate that my client, Meri Brown, has endured in silence for far too long, and justice needs to be served today." Kody's attorney replied with rehearsed composure, trying to minimize the emotional gravity of the allegations. Meri Brown's allegations are overstated. Though the dynamics of a polygamous family are complicated, Mr. Brown has proceeded as he thought best for the family. Kody's poker face was impressive, but Meri could feel the underlying tension in his stance, the slight stiffening of his jaw, the slight glinting of his eyes. He had constructed a life of image and control, but the truth, as would be revealed by Meri, had a way of penetrating even the strongest facades. The crowd waited with breath bated, feeling the emotional hurricane that was about to break. Each whisper, each snap of a camera shutter, each rustle of papers contributed to the tension symphony. This was not just a case. It was a settling of scores. This was the time when years of silence, indifference, and heartache would be met, piece by piece, word by word, in the cold, unyielding glare of the courtroom. Meri sat straight in her chair, her heart pounding, her fists wrapped around the tabletop. She could feel the crushing burden of all the pain from the past bearing down on her, all the tears cried in secret, all the pleas made in silence rising up as a tide of resolve. Today, she would no longer be mute. Today, the world would see the truth she had borne for too long. The judge's gavel fell again, calling the first witness. The tension, already heavy, was weighted even more, tensioned with anticipation. This was not just a court proceeding. It was a tale of betrayal, survival, bravery, and ultimately confrontation. And in that moment, as the air was held momentarily in abeyance, Meri Brown experienced a resonant jolt of understanding. Whatever the result, she had already taken back a portion of herself by standing here in this courtroom, confronting the man who had hurt her so terribly, and insisting upon not being invisible anymore. The courtroom was silent, almost vibrating with anticipation, as Meri's attorney stood and began to present the first piece of evidence. Every word seemed to echo, reverberating against the high ceilings, emphasizing the gravity of the moment. The air felt electric. Every person present, from Kody to the audience, knew that this was the moment when years of hidden pain would finally be laid bare. "Your Honor," Meri's attorney started, clutching a fat folder full of papers, messages, and emails. "We are not standing here today to dissolve a marriage. We stand here today to reveal years of abandonment, emotional abandonment, and betrayal. The facts we put forward today will reveal to the world the reality of Meri Brown's life, overlooked, silenced, and forced to bear it all alone while her husband neglected to honor the vow of marriage." The judge's gaze narrowed as the papers were passed over. Kody sat rigidly, his hands folded in front of him, lips compressed tightly, attempting to hold himself in an air of composure. But there was no mistaking the tension in his shoulders, a minute shifting that revealed the anxiety he sought to conceal. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, the burden of truth hanging over all of them like a storm cloud about to burst. Meri's lawyer began to read aloud, carefully selecting the most compelling pieces of evidence. Messages between Kody and other family members, texts where Meri's needs were dismissed or ignored, emails revealing broken promises. Every word was a small hammer, chipping away at the wall of control Kody had built around himself. "And here, Your Honor," the attorney continued, opening up a printout for all to view, is an email Mr. Brown wrote in 2018. On what was supposed to be a family celebration, observe the total lack of recognition towards Meri. While he planned activities for the rest of the family, Meri was isolated by herself, invisible in the same home she had helped to construct. A murmur ran through the audience. Cameras clicked. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his attention fixed on the documents. It was clear the narrative that had been carefully crafted to present Kody as a loving, attentive husband was beginning to crumble under the weight of undeniable proof. Meri's eyes didn't leave Kody as the lawyer continued. She felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief, for the world would finally know the truth she had borne alone for years. Fear, because facing this truth squarely took a strength she didn't know she had until today. She remembered the nights of solitude, the birthday celebrations in darkness, the numerous times she had stretched out her hands, only to be shunned. All memories flooded forward, energizing her determination. Then came the most powerful piece of evidence yet, a recorded conversation between Kody and one of his wives, in which he admitted frustration at Meri's requests for attention and care. The audio played softly through the courtroom speakers, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Every word was damning, every pause an echo of neglect. The audience gasped quietly. Some instinctively covered their mouths, as if the reality was too sharp to process. Kody's face was serene for an instant, but the eyes flashed with a spasm of panic, a flicker of tightening around the jaw. He recognized that this was an attack he couldn't just deflect. The truth was out, raw, inescapable. The calm facade was slipping, and the room sensed it. The attorney addressed the jury, and the judge gesturing to another group of documents. Your Honor, these are Meri Brown's own calendars. They show a pattern, years of gatherings, moments and milestones in which she was excluded, disregarded, or forgotten altogether. This is not hyperbole or impression. It is written record. A life of chronic neglect and emotional solitude. Meri's hands clenched into fists under the table. She had anticipated this confrontation, but the sheer force of putting her pain on display, exposing it for everyone to witness, was almost overwhelming. And yet, she felt empowered. Every neglectful act, every unspoken slight, every moment she had been invisible, these were no longer hidden in shadows. They were in the light, undeniable, and they demanded acknowledgement. Kody's lawyer tried a counterattack, claiming that life polygamous is complex by nature, that Meri ought to have known the complexity of multiple wives, and that his intention had always been for the greater good of the family. But Meri was prepared. She stared Kody straight in the eyes, and in that stare was a silent message. You cannot excuse neglect with intention. You cannot use intention as a cover while you ignore consequence. The tension in the courtroom thickened as Meri's lawyer presented a final set of evidence. Personal journals and notes Meri had kept over the years. They detailed her internal struggle, her emotional isolation, and the quiet despair of a woman trapped in a life where her voice was unheard. The words were raw, vulnerable, and impossible to ignore. One by one, the courtroom witnesses, the family members, friends, and even staff who had observed the household, were called forward. They corroborated Meri's claims. Kody's favoritism, the selective attention, the subtle dismissals, and the emotional neglect that had become the backbone of her daily life. Each testimony struck like a hammer, reinforcing the pattern of pain that Meri had endured. By evening, the courtroom was no longer merely a room. It was a stage for truth, a theater of accountability. Each piece of paper, each witness, each sentence had eaten away at the meticulously constructed veneer Kody had created. The audience, reporters, and legal counsel could feel the changing energy. This was no longer a matter of speculation or impression. This was a matter of irrefutable evidence, carefully gathered, prepared to hold a man responsible for the years of emotional deprivation he had caused. Meri breathed a sigh of relief as the session ended. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with an overwhelming feeling of vindication. The secrets that had tormented her, the hidden wounds, and the silent anguish, were now revealed. And in their revelation was her strength. She had endured, survived, and now she had been heard. When the judge recessed the hearing for a few minutes, the hushed voices in the courtroom were audible, bordering on awed. Cameras caught every look, every reaction, every small change in body positioning. The world was witnessing, and Meri had ensured they would witness the truth, unbridled, unflinching, and unquestionable. She looked once at Kody, who sat there, his calm facade beginning to crack under the strain. For the first time in years, he was no longer able to control the story. The facts had spoken, and it was obvious to everyone in the room that this was more than a divorce case. It was a reckoning. Meri was clear-headed. The road ahead of her would be tough, but she no longer dreaded conflict. She had confronted the secrets, stripped away the truth, and taken a strong place she had been denied for so long. Today, the world had seen her bravery, and it was only the start. The courtroom was hushed as the initial witnesses were brought to the stand. The atmosphere was heavy with expectation, all eyes fixed on the developing drama. This was no longer a legal process. It was a stage where years of hidden facts and unspoken hurt would be brought to life, and each family member carried their own tale of the broken marriage to the fore. The first to speak was a close family friend, who had spent years observing Kody and Meri's relationship. With a steady, solemn voice, she recounted countless occasions where Meri had been overlooked, her emotional needs ignored. "I've seen her sit at family gatherings, smiling politely while Kody focused all his attention elsewhere," the witness said. "It wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was every holiday, every birthday, every significant moment. She was always present, but she was never really seen." Meri's eyes glistened, not with tears of sorrow, but with the quiet validation that comes from hearing someone speak your truth. Kody shifted slightly in his chair, trying to maintain composure, but there was a noticeable tension in his jaw. The calm exterior he had perfected for years was beginning to crack, and the courtroom felt it. Then one of Kody's other wives stepped up to testify. Her words were crafted with caution, but they rang with authenticity. Kody always appeared distracted, she confessed. He loved the family, yes, but Meri, she needed more attention, more care, more love than she got. "I saw her struggle behind the scenes, and I couldn't do anything to alter the dynamic." The room suspended its breath. Even in a polygamous family, where there is shared attention, the omission Meri received had been apparent, uncontestable, and psychologically harmful. The crowd listened, transfixed. Each admission, each word dismantled the story Kody had sought to continue. His eyes darted to Meri, a flash of defensiveness and quiet remorse crossing his face. For years, he had regulated the face he presented to the world, projecting harmony and equilibrium. Now the reality was peeling away in the most public and inescapable manner. Then came the most poignant moment. Meri's sister was called to the stand. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she rose, voice trembling with emotion yet filled with determination. "She deserves love, Kody," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "Not emptiness, not silence, not a marriage where her heart is invisible. I have seen her give, and all she received was neglect, despite the hope for the slightest display of concern. You cannot use the excuse anymore." Gasps spread through the courtroom. The words hung there like a storm cloud, heavy, irrefutable, and impossible to deny. Cameras snapped, recording each face, each brush of emotion. The judge moved forward in his seat, his own face somber, and nodded as if to indicate the gravity of the testimony. Even Kody, whose face had been carefully set all along, could not keep from the slight slump of his shoulders, the quick flash of guilt in his eyes. The following witnesses, including close friends, extended family, and even household staff, painted a detailed picture of Meri's daily life. They spoke of the quiet sacrifices, the emotional labor she carried alone, and the repeated patterns of neglect. One by one, each testimony reinforced what Meri had been saying for years. She was a partner ignored, a wife overlooked, and a woman whose emotional needs had been consistently disregarded. With every word, Meri experienced a jumbled assortment of feelings. There was pain, naturally pain from having to recall the memories, pain from airing the wounds for all to see, but there was freedom, too. The truth she'd kept hidden for so long was finally being voiced, seen by individuals who could no longer turn a blind eye. She knew that her pain was worthwhile, that she had a voice, and that the world would at last see things as they were. Kody's lawyer tried to refute, citing instances when Kody had attempted to distribute attention between his several wives, assuring that neglect was an accident. But the burden of the testimonies was overwhelming. Each anecdote, each personal recollection, reaffirmed one undeniable reality. Meri had been invisible in her own marriage. No explanation could wipe out years of emotional neglect and the anguish it had brought. The tension in the courtroom became nearly unbearable, as the next witness, an old family friend, described private conversations with Kody. "I warned him," the witness testified, voice steady. "I told him she felt invisible. I told him she was hurting. And yet nothing ever changed." The cycle continued, and the hurt became greater. This is not a lie. It is recorded in every conversation, every comment, every moment Meri struggled to reach out for connection. By the end of the family testimony, the courtroom had been shifted. It was no longer merely a site of legal process. It was a stage of emotional reality, a venue in which years of suffering, neglect, and quiet anguish had been revealed. Each family member who took the stand had contributed another thread to the story, weaving a tapestry of irrefutable proof against the fiction Kody had presented for all those years. Meri felt a shot of strength she didn't realize she had. The voices of all the people who had watched her suffer reinforced her own, and there was a chorus of truth that could not be drowned out. She knew this was not just about her marriage. It was a statement of self-worth, a refusal to be ignored, and a message to anyone who had ever let neglect go unchallenged. Kody sat still, his demeanor tense. He was aware of the effect of what had been revealed. The courtroom, which had been a battleground of his authority, had changed. Each testimony, each tale, each emotional revelation had eroded his carefully crafted reputation. For the first time, he could no longer manipulate the narrative. The truth of his neglect was exposed, and the repercussions were about to take its toll. With the judge's announcement of a brief recess, the courtroom was filled with muffled discussions. Journalists speculated, cameras kept snapping, and the crowd soaked up the emotional significance of the session. Meri breathed deeply, feeling the weight of relief compounded with expectation. The truth had finally been voiced, but the war was by no means won. Cross-examinations, confrontations, and the final reckoning awaited in the forthcoming sessions that would decide the direction of her life and marriage. This was a turning point for Meri. The family voices had given her strength, clarity, and determination. She was no longer the meek, forgotten wife. She was a force, a woman who had suffered, survived, and now insisted on being recognized, on having justice and respect. And the world was watching. The courtroom was charged. Each seat appeared to hum with energy as the cross-examinations commenced. This was what the world had been holding out for, the showdown between Meri Brown and Kody Brown. Decades of silence, heartache, and hidden anger were about to clash, and tension filled the air, almost palpable, like a storm waiting to erupt. Kody stood up first, answering questions put to him by his lawyer. His voice was calm, even practiced. He discussed intentions, family obligation, and the intricacies of polygamy. "I have always acted with the best interests of the family at heart," he insisted, eyes sometimes darting toward Meri. "I never meant to hurt anyone." But Meri was prepared. She canted forward, her eyes snapping to Kody's. There was no fear in them, just a still anger, a calm resolve that insisted on being heard. As her lawyer started the cross-examination, questions were sharp, piercing through all the excuses, all the evasions, all the justifications he had relied on for years. "Mr. Brown," the lawyer said, voice strong, "you talk of purpose, but purpose without action does nothing to stop suffering. How do you explain years of disregard in the face of professing to care?" Kody's face grew tight. For the first time, his calm appeared to shake. He parted his lips, hesitated, then tried to speak. But the burden of evidence against him, the testimony, messages, emails, and family accounts, hung precariously in the atmosphere. Each word he attempted to use as armor was ineffectual against the rising wall of truth. She stood tall, voice firm, unshakable, each word landing with the impact of years of unspoken anguish. "You constructed a life of fantasies, Kody," she spat, eyes alight, "while I existed in silence, waiting for your attention, your concern, your affection. I tolerated the forgotten birthdays, the neglected holidays, the empty nights when you concentrated elsewhere. I waited, I hoped, and I hurt. And now I want recognition. I demand respect. I demand justice. The courtroom gasped. The words hung suspended in the air like lightning, buzzing with power, unescapable and unrefusable. Cameras snapped, freezing the intensity of the moment. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the emotional whirlwind churning between the two ex-spouses. Kody opened his mouth to respond, but Meri's attorney continued the assault with precision, highlighting every instance of neglect, every broken promise, every subtle dismissal that had defined their marriage. The pattern was clear, consistent, and unassailable. Kody's attempts at justification grew weaker, his words heavier with hesitation and defensiveness. The facade of calm he had carried for years was crumbling before the entire courtroom. Then a particularly damning piece of evidence emerged, a journal entry by Meri herself, detailing years of emotional isolation. The language was raw, exposed, and impossible to dismiss. Her lawyer read from it. I am invisible. I exist, but it doesn't matter. I yearn for his attention, his nurturing, his recognition. And still, year after year, I remain alone, waiting for a love that never wholly comes. A silence descended upon the courtroom. All eyes were on Meri. All ears were attentive to her words. Even Kody's calm cracked, briefly, as he understood that the extent of his failures had been recorded in the most private, indefeasible manner. Cross-examinations turned increasingly intense. Kody tried to defend himself, claiming the challenges of multiple relationships and responsibilities as justification. But each argument was met with precision and counter-evidence. Friends, family, and even household staff had provided testimony that reinforced Meri's narrative. She had been consistently neglected, emotionally unsupported, and treated as invisible in the marriage. One of the most heated exchanges had the courtroom almost shaking with emotion. Kody, his frustration building, raised his voice a notch or two. I've done my best. I've tried to navigate a multifaceted family structure. I love all my wives. Meri's answer was cool, incisive, and indelible. Your best was never good enough for me, Kody. I do not demand perfection. I demand presence. I demand acknowledgement. I demand to be seen in my own marriage. And for years, I have been invisible while you rationalized neglect as intention. The judge's eyes widened, forward-leaning as if to soak up the emotional weight of the confrontation. The room fell silent, all witnesses feeling the full power of the confrontation. This wasn't merely a war of words. It was the culmination of years of emotional pain, betrayal, and the strength to stand and demand accountability. Witnesses called during this session added fuel to the fire. They corroborated Meri's claims, recounting instances where Kody had prioritized other aspects of life over Meri's emotional well-being. Each account reinforced a pattern of neglect and favoritism that could no longer be disputed. By day's end, the courtroom was a war zone of truth. Each look, each movement, each phrase uttered between Kody and Meri was weighed down by years of pain. The air was tense, almost choking as the true nature of their relationship was revealed for all to see. Meri, though weary, felt an odd clarity. For the first time in years, she had spoken her truth out loud, loudly, and in public. She had stood before the man who had hurt her, taken away excuses and apologies, and insisted on recognition. The battle on the emotional field had been brutal, but she stood firmer, her voice stronger, her presence palpable. Kody, meanwhile, sat in silence, his normal cloak of authority now broken. The world had seen the truth, and there was no longer a means to spin it, justify it, or overlook it. The conflict had exposed the reality of his failures, and the ramifications were now underway. As the judge recessed for the day, the courtroom hummed with chatter, cameras snapping every moment, every face. Meri sat still, allowing the feelings to wash over her. She had confronted the storm straight on, and although the fight was far from won, she had already gained a piece of herself, the piece that had yearned to be noticed, heard, and respected. In the corridors outside the courtroom, rumors flared like brush fire. She stood her ground, she demanded the truth, and no one could ignore it. Meri felt her heart surge with a still, deep triumph. She had endured the confrontation, voiced her sorrow, and taken her voice. The reckoning was at hand, and she was prepared. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air almost charged with excitement. Each heartbeat echoed off the walls. Hours, weeks, in fact, if one counted an emotional load of testimony, evidence, and confrontation, finally came to a head. Meri Brown sat with hands clasped, her chest expanding and contracting in measured breaths. She had weathered the tempest, stood up to Kody, and uttered words she had kept locked away for so long. Now it was left to the judge's discretion. Kody sat across from her, his composure normally unshaken strained. His entire body was knotted with tension, and there was a flash of doubt in his eyes he couldn't conceal. The courtroom, previously abuzz with whispers and speculation, dropped into an expectant silence as the judge leaned forward. The gavel hit once, crisply, demanding the room's attention. This court is aware of the emotional distress, neglect, and pain experienced by Meri Brown. The judge stated, voice firm and deep. Marriage is a bond which calls for respect, care, and mutual recognition. Though intention is significant, it is not a reason for extended emotional disregard. The testimony given, evidence, records, and personal testimonies, indicates a continuous pattern of disregard and emotional isolation. The courtroom was silent, as though holding its breath collectively, for the verdict. Meri experienced a stirring of nervousness, but underneath was a flood of calm rising. She had prepared all her life for this moment. Her years of suffering, her strength in telling her truth, her unshakable determination, all had culminated in this moment of judgment. Therefore, the judge went on. This court decrees in favor of Meri Brown. She will be released from the marital ties that have brought her grievous emotional damage. Additionally, the court recognizes her pain and sanctions her entitlement to emotional support and validation. The records and depositions that have been presented are irrefutable evidence that her welfare was impaired, and justice demands such recognition. A wave of relief, shock, and victory swept over Meri. Tears sprang in her eyes. Not tears of regret, but tears of freedom, vindication, and triumph. Years of silence, years of living through emotional abandonment, had brought her to this point of public vindication. For the first time in years, she felt heard, seen, and vindicated. Kody was seated in frozen shock, his face a look of disbelief and quiet guilt. The meticulous image of control and poise he had cultivated over years had broken under the load of reality. The evidence, the confrontations, the voices of friends and family, all had conspired to present the truth of his actions and their ramifications. For the first time, the world was able to witness the cracks in his facade, the human toll of his negligence, and the irrefutable effect on Meri. Meri stood up from her chair, her movements slow and elegant. Every step she took toward the door was symbolic, a walk away from hurt and invisibility, and toward power and liberty. The light pouring through courthouse windows looked brighter, warmer, almost festive, as if the world itself was acknowledging her triumph. Cameras clicked madly, taking photos of every face, every tear, every resolute gesture. But Meri barely saw them. She was no longer struggling for recognition. She had it. As she passed by Kody, her eyes met his one last time. There was no fury in her eyes now, but a quiet, unbreakable resolve. She had confronted the man who had hurt her, sought the truth, and won, not only in court, but in the restoring of her own sense of self. Kody turned away, unable to look at her, recognizing that the dynamic had changed irreparably. Outside the courthouse building, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation and curiosity. Journalists packed the steps, cameras taping, microphones at the ready, but Meri moved confidently and with dignity, replying to only what she saw fit. "I am thankful for justice," she stated simply, voice firm, "and I am ready to move on with my life." Her statement was one that rang true, and it expressed the very spirit of a woman who had persevered, fought, and now stood strong. For the world watching, this was more than a courtroom drama. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the power of truth. Meri's victory symbolized something larger: the right to be seen, the right to be respected, and the right to demand acknowledgement when one has been silenced. Kody, in contrast, was subjected to the effects of years of abandonment. The courtroom had been a reflection of the decisions he had made, and the verdict was a constant reminder that actions, or lack thereof, have consequences far greater than intentions. As the courthouse emptied, whispers spread like wildfire. She stood up, she fought, she won. Social media buzzed, viewers shared clips and reactions, and Meri's story became a beacon for anyone who had ever felt overlooked, silenced, or invisible. Meri stepped away from the courthouse steps, the burden of years disappearing from her shoulders. Each tear, each isolating night spent, each unspoken cry for notice, had ended in this moment. She'd lived, she'd struggled, and she'd emerged victorious. And looking forward, to a life defined no longer by abandonment, but by self-esteem and strength, she knew this was merely the start of taking back her life. The courtroom doors shut behind her, yet the tale remained, carved in the memories of all who heard it. It was not merely a tale of a marriage's demise, it was about courage, about truth, and the unmistakable strength of standing up for oneself. And in the case of Meri Brown, the judgment was not the conclusion. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would live life on her own terms for the first time, free from the shadows of abandonment, and enabled by the recognition she had long been waiting for.